So in this lecture, I want to talk to you about privacy, about the fact also that it is still a concern for people who don't use social media platforms. So we begin by talking about everyday privacy concerns in general, and then we talk about some useful coping strategies. So we have cases, for example, you might not be using social media platforms, but maybe you like reading books on Kindle devices and you order them, for example, online. If you do order them online, what you need to know is that all of the information about your bank card purchases, all of the information associated with your bank card, your profile that you create on this book store website are bits of information that are used to that are drawn from your profile that allow the online bookstore provider to have information about you. Your bank knows information about you just because they have to. You cannot exist as a person without, for example, a bank account. If you're going on vacation, for example, most hotels will not allow you to book a room without providing some guarantee of payment. And usually that is manifested in the form of some credit card or something similar that allows them to identify you and to have some way of tracing you if something goes wrong, for example. And all of this, for example, all of these examples constitute what is becoming or what is going to constitute or going to make or create a digital footprint for yourself, whether you do this actively or whether you do this in some passive way. There are basically two kinds of digital footprints that you can create. So you can do this passively. In this case, data is collected without your knowing it. So for example, when you use your bank card, data is collected about what you purchased, for example, how much you spent on the purchase, and your bank needs to know this in order to be sure that the transaction was conducted at the store at which it was conducted, and that the person who authenticated or who claimed to have made the payment, either in the form of the provision of a PIN code or a signature, is in fact you. And so if you come to complain, for example, to indicate that this purchase was not by yourself, they need to have some way of tracing or finding out how it is that it wasn't you, and so on and so forth. Okay. Active digital footprints, on the other hand, are created when you actively publish information about yourself. So in this case, we assume that you know about the consequences of publishing this information, you know about the impact that this can have, and you deliberately choose to make this information about yourself available. So for example, on social media platforms, you decide, for example, to post a picture about yourself. It's a decision that you want to do and that you have decided on to post this information about this content that you want to share with a certain group of users. The passive digital footprint is what I would like to focus on more for today, about the users who, for example, don't use social media platforms on the basis that sharing information is something that they cannot deal with, and they cannot deal with the fact that there's so much information about themselves out there. And to point out to you that even though you don't use social media platforms, you need to be careful also about the ways in which you share information. Information can be stored in many ways. It's usually situation dependent. So for example, think about when you have a mobile device and you're lost in some new city that you go to, and you turn on the mobile location setting in order to allow you to use GPS, for example, to route yourself around the city or around the point that around the place that you are in. all of that information is transmitted somewhere where they know, for example, to the GPS provider, for example, where they know suddenly where exactly you are, what exactly you're doing, and what sites you visited. And all of this information is transmitted with or without your consent because you decided to use the location services, and you decided also to combine that with the map service, which also depends on GPS services, which are collecting information about what it is you're doing. Other examples are, for example, IP address tracking, which lots of companies or businesses use in order to, for example, tell what sorts of web pages you visited in order to better coin or better form the way that they advertise products to you and to increase the success rate of you buying what it is that they are advertising. Okay. And then if you are not using internet systems, think about offline interactions, for example, with administrators. So when you go, for example, to get your social security card, for example, your identity card or a passport, for example, there's data that is created about you, and all of this is stored somewhere, which creates some digital footprint about your interactions, about your person. A good book to look at is that written by Tony Fisher in 2007. It's self-published, where he talks basically about his digital footprint and about also the consequences of information sharing and of data storage and what this can have in terms of the future, in terms of how this data is used or manipulated in order to control people or in order to study behaviors of people. Okay. And in terms of all of this, I point out finally on this point that browsing the internet, all daily activities, for example, are unconsciously activities that create a digital footprint. So, for example, just agreeing, for example, to have Wi-Fi in your household is a way of creating, for example, of producing information that tells people about what you're doing. Agreeing, for example, to live in a smart home, and all of the information that is collected about your activities is creating a digital footprint. So you can create information or supply information to the internet, to people collecting information about user internet behaviors, even if you're not using social media platforms. And so therefore, you need to be careful about what it is that you share, and also take the same measures that we use for protecting data on social media platforms to protect yourself when you interact with these other platforms. Think about, for example, when what you can do, for example, or what you need to think about is what it is you're doing. So, for example, what is the consequence of some action that you take? So, take, for example, loyalty cards. So, you go into some shop and they say, "Oh, you've bought so many things. Would you like our friendship card, or would you like our loyalty card?" And on the surface, it seems quite simple. You accept a loyalty card, and then if you buy enough stuff from the shop, you maybe get a free gift card or something. What you need to remember is that loyalty cards are a second level on bank cards. So they tell the shop, for example, the shopkeeper, what it is you've bought, for example, who exactly you are. There's information, for example, about what sort of profession you have, about what sort of person you have, and it allows them to advertise more stuff to you or more products to you. It also allows them to gather information about shopping patterns that you have, for example, and other information that you might not be comfortable for people to discover about yourself. So you need to think about what it means for accepting a free card, for example, in terms of what this means for a digital footprint that you're creating. Okay. Think about, for example, reading privacy policy statements. I said that before in the previous 2 lectures that reading privacy policy statements is something that we tend to avoid because it's too long, there's so much jargon, it's difficult to understand. But you need to read these statements before you click on agree. And this is very important because you might be agreeing to conditions that you would not normally agree to if you had taken the time to inform yourself about them. Sometimes just using old-fashioned methods is better in terms of reducing your digital footprint. So for example, if you buy a bar of chocolate and it costs, for example, €2 or $2 or R2, what you want to do is to avoid using, for example, your bank card to make this transaction. Maybe what you want to do is to use cash and only use a bank card for bigger transactions. I wrap up now by recapping on all of the topics that we talked about. So we talked about social media privacy in general. We began by talking about what social media platforms are in general. The lesson I want you to take from all of this series of lectures is to bear in mind that while we've talked about social media platforms because they are content-rich platforms, the same principles of protecting your data apply pretty much to any internet applications or systems that you're wanting to use. We talked about the importance of choosing a really strong password, and we see that this impacts on everything from the way that, for example, if you decide to use an encryption mechanism, that choosing a strong password, for example, translates into to generating a really strong key and to a good encryption and to a good parameter for your encryption protocol and to better protect your data. We talked about privacy policies, both when you need to set them manually, the fact that they allow you to control access to data, and we talked about the preliminary work on the fact that we are looking at how these privacy policies can be automated, but that you always need to check to make sure that the system or the application for automating your privacy policies is actually doing what you want it to do. And the reason that you check is because you want to make sure that your data is protected in the ways that you want it to be. And this is because we say that you need to have a conscious effort, or the effort of protecting your data needs to come from yourself. It needs to be conscious. It needs to be something that you think about because of the consequences that this can have on your person in terms of identity theft. We looked at things, for example, like attacks, for example, like spamming, like spoofing. We've looked at, for example, anonymous browsing, ways that you can use in order to protect the interactions that you have with other users online. We've looked also at encryption, and we've looked at the fact that it is important always to protect our data even when we are not using social media platforms. I want to wrap up by saying that I will continue to be available to you on the forum. I look forward to the feedback that you will provide me with respect to this series of lectures that I have had. It will be good to know what to improve and what I have done well, and also to find out what you've enjoyed the most. If you need any help, for example, feel free to contact me on the forum. I'm always available to answer questions and to help where I can. I hope that you've enjoyed this series of lectures and that you will go on to build on from this to attend more security lectures and to learn more about what it is to protect your data online and what you need to do to be careful, because if we all participate in being careful about what we share, we will make for a more safe internet society, for more safe social media platforms, which will be a benefit to all of us.